Okay. I assume this is working. Okay. Um, hmm. Okay, so currently there is no one else in this stream yet. That's fine. I'll just run around. Guess maybe 7:30 is not the best time for this, perhaps. Probably some people are still eating dinner and stuff. That's cool. You know what? People can just watch this back if they like. So I'm going to do a bit of a chapter reading from the upcoming book Til Time, the Sultan's Siege, which will be available on this Wednesday on pretty much all good ebook platforms. So if historical adventure is your kind of thing, then why not have a look at it? For the time being, I'm going to be reading out a little piece from chapter 2 of the book, so not too far into the story. Our two protagonists for this, Ashton and Imogen, have just found themselves abruptly transported to the middle of a strange, unknown, scrubby desert, and have just come across what appears to be a very medieval army equipped with spears and armor and such. Not the sort of thing you see in the 21st century. So currently, they are just trying to find out where they are, trying to find some safety, and I'll begin to read. The desert sun remained high in the sky as they carefully shadowed the army. Even from a distance, they were able to make out new details, including the camels that plodded amongst them, and the headscarves and turbans that many wore in place of a helmet. This is impossible, Imogen muttered. We can't have time traveled. That's not a real thing. Whatever happened to focusing on finding safety before pondering the situation? Ashton replied, keeping his voice just as low. That was before I knew that we'd been teleported through both space and time, Imogen replied. You know, we might not have actually time traveled, Ashton thought aloud. This could be some Renaissance fair stuff, or a movie set. You think they're making a new Prince of Persia film? Somehow that's just as likely as time travel. She pulled her phone out. I'm not getting any GPS or reception, but that's not surprising. If this was the 21st century, I think I'd still have GPS. She groaned a little. What am I saying? This can't be the distant past. That's physically impossible. You'd need a wormhole, or at least a DeLorean. They continued following, the ground becoming sandier, the sun getting higher. As they walked, the sounds of rapid thuds became audible from somewhere nearby. They crested the next ridge in a crouch, not wanting to be spotted. Atop the next ridge, a horse cantered past them. Its rider was swathed in linen and armor made from tiny squares of metal, and he carried a spear in one hand and had a curved sword hanging from his belt. He didn't seem to notice them. Ashton visibly shivered. Christ, that was terrifying. I thought we were dead for sure. Imogen frowned at him. What? I don't think people randomly murdered each other back whenever we are. There I go again, bloody time-traveling nonsense. But he shook his head. No, I know, just... This is all a bit too much, don't you think? I'm actually a little bit afraid. If we've time-traveled, the past was not a nice place. At least you're brave enough for the both of us. I don't know how you're not scared. Oh, I'm scared, Imogen thought to herself. This is insane. But I have to keep it together, for the both of us. She glanced up at the sun. Looks like we're heading west, she mused. Do you know where we might be? Ashton raised an eyebrow. How should I know? I'm not an expert at geography. Imogen shrugged, feeling suddenly pissed at herself for her thought process. It wasn't her fault, really. She was tired, a little tipsy, and feeling more than a little dehydrated. She'd hoped the question would help distract him. Regardless, she'd already started digging the hole. Well, you've been to the Middle East before. Does any of this look familiar? Ashton glanced around, nodding. Oh, of course. This looks exactly like the only part of Iran I went to. That part also just so happens to look like half the other places in the Middle East. He glared at Imogen. You know full well I went to Shiraz once when I was a kid and haven't been anywhere else in the whole region. I'm English born and raised, same as you. Imogen held up her hands defensively. I know. I don't know why the thought occurred to me. I just decided to voice it. I'm just tired. I'm not thinking straight. Ashton sighed. I know, so am I. Sorry I got upset. No, don't be sorry. I'm the one who should. Ashton waved his hand. Stop. We're about to fall into an endless pit of English-style apologizing. That's the last thing we need. Imogen couldn't help but smile. True. She rubbed her eyes. I really hope we find a town soon. I need some water. They reached the top of the next ridge, and Ashton grinned. Do you reckon you could ask for us to get back home right now? I think the universe is listening to you. Imogen lifted her head and forced her eyes to focus. It took a moment, but out of the shimmering desert blossomed 100 small buildings, all whitewashed and flat-roofed, with patches of trees interspersed throughout. Oh, thank God. She began moving towards it in a rush, but Ashton grabbed her arm to stop her. She turned back, cocking her head curiously, wondering what his problem was. A couple of things first, he began. One, we probably can't speak the local language. The chances of us being anywhere near Persia are pretty slim, and either way, there's a huge difference between the modern Persian I know and the language spoken even 100 years ago. We have to be careful not to speak to anyone. Second, and don't take offense to this, but you're a girl. Imogen raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. I'm suddenly feeling less guilty about my earlier comment. Do go on. Ashton stared at her pointedly. Well, we seem to be in the Middle East. A lot of places there don't let women go around walking around, showing as much skin as you are. Also, you're wearing a t-shirt and jeans. You're not exactly going to blend in. Imogen had to agree with that. I figured. My red hair's not going to help either, I imagine. So, we stick to back streets. Maybe see if we can steal some clothes. I mean, either way, I don't want to continue wearing all black. It's so bloody hot. They continued walking forwards. It doesn't actually feel that hot. It's just that your clothes are soaking up sunlight. I feel pretty fine. Imogen rolled her eyes. Well, good for you. I guess wearing linen was the right call. I'm probably more used to Scottish temperatures anyway. As they got closer, the sound of a bustling town grew louder. Judging by the groups of people heading into town, all guiding pack animals of some kind, it was a market day. They made their way into a grove of fig trees behind a large pair of buildings, taking a moment to rest out of sight and in the shade. Imogen tentatively grabbed a fig from the tree and took a bite before spitting the flesh out. That's really gross, she said, gagging just a little. Ashton examined a couple of other fruits hanging nearby. I think they're a little past ripe, he commented, and I'm pretty sure you're not meant to bite into them like that. Imogen grimaced. Yeah, that checks out. She looked around. Do you reckon anyone's inside? The building looks pretty quiet and empty. Ashton examined the building. It's hard to tell. The windows on the upper floor are open, but I can't hear any voices coming out of it. It looked just as he would have expected of an older style of building from his one trip to Iran, mud brick painted white, with wide windows and a large arched doorway. Imogen narrowed her eyes. All right, I'm breaking in. Ashton frowned. What? Imogen? She dashed off, keeping low as she moved through the rows of figs towards the house. There were a few barrels piled next to the wall, giving her the perfect starting point. She jumped, planting a foot on the barrels, and pushed herself upwards. There were no more handholds or footholds between her and the window, but she wasn't bothered. Her shoes had good soles, and she gripped the face of the wall with them as she continued to propel upwards. Her hands found the open windowsill. She came to a stop, hanging limply in place. Sweat was already beading up on her forehead, though that could be from the heat or the exertion, she wasn't sure. Once she was confident there were no reactions to her fingers appearing on the windowsill, she hauled herself up and through the opening. She tumbled as she hit the floor inside and glanced around at the room she found herself in. There was a plain bed pushed up against one wall, with a set of drawers on either side, and a shield and scimitar decorating the opposite wall. That's another point to the time travel theory, Imogen thought to herself. Though my room has a sort of decoration too, and this still feels so unsettling. She padded over to one set of drawers and began rifling through the clothes within. As she had expected, they were all in the local style, made from linen, with wide sleeves and open fronts. However, as she went through them, she concluded that the owner of the clothes was far shorter and wider than her. Any of the normally floor-length dresses would maybe reach halfway down her shins, which definitely wouldn't do. As she went to close the drawer, she spotted a small leather pouch tucked away in the corner. She picked it up, heard the jangle of metal within, and shrugged. These people had a nice big home and an orchard full of figs. She had only a t-shirt and jeans. They wouldn't miss it. She went to the drawers on the opposite side and found that the clothes within, while similar, were stuffed full of mothballs. These ones seemed to be for males and would have suited Ashton, except for the fact that they were old and tattered. Imogen frowned. That's a little gross. Unless they're probably dead. She grimaced, quietly sliding the drawer back into place. Sorry. She briefly considered putting the coins back, but it didn't seem like much money anyway. She went to the door and exited into a hallway. A set of stairs descended to the ground floor, and two other doors went into other rooms. She began walking to the closest one, which was slightly ajar, but stopped as the quiet sound of a child singing drifted out. Imogen leant to one side and caught a glimpse of a small girl in a yellow robe playing with a set of homemade dolls on the floor of her bedroom. It was difficult to make out the words she was singing, but Imogen was sure that she heard something similar to summer. Her eyes wide with surprise, she quietly turned back and tiptoed to the other door, finding herself in another bedroom, this time with a double bed, several sets of drawers, a large chest, and a crib tucked away on one side. A small table was set up on the left. Its surface was covered in various pages of text, inkpots, and incense burners. As she passed it, heading towards one of the sets of drawers, her eyes caught a particular line of Arabic script. They have been warned that they shall incur their own ruin if they reject them, for kufra by itself is sheer folly and ignorance. Imogen stopped in her tracks, stepped back once, and turned to study the page more closely. She picked it up, her mouth slightly agape, and read the line once more. It was in Arabic, she was sure of it. She could make out the fluid, curving script that was so recognizable, but it was in English. She could barely speak any French or Gaelic, let alone any other languages, so it had to be English for her to read it. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to focus, but when she opened them again, everything remained as it was. This can't be real, she murmured. What is happening? Feeling more than a little disconcerted, she placed the sheet back down and moved on to the drawers. Inside were a dozen linen and silk garments, all of the same long and airy style. She picked out a plain dress that would reach her feet and slipped it on, tying a blue sash around her waist to hold it together. There was a set of linen and silk headscarves in there too. She quickly grabbed a plain, cream-colored one to match the robe and slung it around her neck for the time being. In another set of drawers, she found shirts and pants, some a little baggy, but not unlike Ashton's current clothes. From a distance, and covered by something else, his linen shirt and chinos wouldn't draw any attention. Instead, she grabbed a linen kaftan embellished with red patterns on the sleeves and a simple headdress that would cover the head and neck. As she left, her arms full of linen, she paused again at the small shrine. The parchment adorning the surface was still written in Arabic, but she could still read it. She forced her eyes away and shook her head, trying to clear her mind. As she exited back into the hallway, she noticed a set of stairs heading down. Her curiosity getting the better of her, she descended to the ground floor, her ears pricked in case anyone else was home. Downstairs, the house opened up into a wide living space, with a low table surrounded by cushions in the middle and a set of loungers and piles of pillows off to one side for relaxing. A doorway led off into another room, where Imogen could see a set of shelves holding various jars and sacks. Her stomach grumbled slightly. The fig had, as expected, done nothing to sate her hunger, so she made her way into the kitchen against her better judgment. As she crept in, she spotted a large piece of flatbread sitting amongst flour. She darted over to it and grabbed it. The warm smell of coriander and saffron wafted into her nostrils, and she smiled as she ripped off a piece. Someone shouted from a few feet away from her as something wooden clattered to the ground. She whirled around, coming face to face with a bearded man in a turban and a plain robe. His look of surprise turned quickly to anger. "Diz!" Imogen's eyes widened. "What?" Before she could even finish the word, he lunged forward, grabbing her wrists and causing her to drop the bread and the clothes. She tried to pull away, but he was fiercely determined to keep her in place, and she couldn't break his grip. "I don't want to have to do this," she growled, pushing one hand down while the other forced itself upwards. Naturally, he reversed the motion, trying to keep her hands together, which is what she wanted. She switched direction, letting him pull her hands back together and past each other. Her upper hand struck down on his wrist, releasing the iron-handed grip, and giving her a chance to fight back. Her fist connected with his ribs, knocking him back. She didn't use all her power. The man looked like an older servant, and she didn't want to damage him. But her hesitation wasn't reflected by the man, even after the punch. He released his grip on her wrist as he pulled his right hand back and swung a solid punch at her face. She wasn't expecting it, and though she managed to dodge it for the most part, it still struck her jaw and boxed her ear. Rearing slightly, she held a hand to her jaw as she fell back against the wall. He came in for a second strike, but this time she jammed her hand against his chest and knocked him away. "Son of a," she muttered, her face locking into a grimace as she made a choice in her mind. Imogen darted forward, switching into a boxing mode, and swung a hook into the rib, taking his breath away. Without hesitating, she brought her other fist arcing down at the man's temple, connecting perfectly with the weak part of the skull. He spun slightly as he dropped to the ground. His limbs moved about a little, indicating he was still conscious, so Imogen scooped up the linen kaftan and headdress from the floor and hurried to the rear door. Ashton popped out from behind a fig tree as she burst into the orchard. He opened his mouth to say something, but she simply threw the clothing into his arms as she darted past. "What happened?" he asked, as she hid behind a tree to catch her breath. She waved a hand. "Nothing I couldn't handle." He frowned, not believing her. "Were there people home? You didn't have to kick an entire family unconscious, did you?" Excuse me. Imogen began winding the scarf over the top of her head, hiding her bright red hair. "There was just a servant and a little girl. The servant caught me, but I beat him, more or less." Ashton waited a moment for her to elaborate, but nothing further was coming. "What about the little girl? Is she still conscious?" he asked slowly. "Of course she is. Why would I knock out a little girl? I'm not a sadist." She glanced over at the small shed on one side of the fig orchard. "Put that thingy on. We can't stick around." As Ashton began pulling on his new robe, Imogen went over to the shed and peeked inside. Sure enough, there was a rake leaning against the wall, amidst a range of farming implements and yard tools. The metal head of the rake was a little rusted, so she shrugged as she picked it up. "I doubt anyone will miss this either," she muttered to herself. She stepped out of the shed and placed the rake against the wall, with the head against the ground. She stepped back, settling into her stance with her hands clasped in front of her, and raised her back knee to her chest. In one fluid motion, she pulled her hands back in and straightened her leg with lightning speed towards the rake's handle. Her foot connected with excellent precision, and the head of the rake snapped free. The handle was left with a jagged, broken end that was full of splinters, but that wasn't a big deal. Ashton raised an eyebrow as he walked over. A light bit of B&E, and now you're a destructive menace to society. Was there a particular reason for hating that rake, or is that just the way chaos is blowing today? Imogen twirled the wooden staff in her hand. I was actually looking for a broom, but this was good enough. We're in a strange land and a strange time, so I'm not going unarmed. Not after the kitchen. Ashton snorted. Well, hopefully I can find a rapier or saber somewhere around here, else you'll have to protect us both. Imogen shrugged magnanimously. I saw a pretty medieval sword and shield in one of those rooms, so there might be something around. It was a big scimitar-looking thing, so I didn't think it would suit you. Ashton shook his head. No, gross. I need something light and fast, not something that will cut through a person in a single strike. Though, I guess if we get in trouble, it might be better if we just run away. And badly injuring someone won't help our case either. Well, let's have a look around, I guess. You didn't find any food in that house? Imogen grimaced. I did. That's where I fought the servant. A little girl's scream echoed out from the lower floor of the house. Speaking of, we shouldn't hang around. We can buy some food in the market. Good call. But how do we do that? We don't have any money to buy things with. They hurried around the side of the house, heading out into the empty road, running towards the town centre. Once they were far enough away, they slowed to a walk. Imogen went for her pocket and realized she had a long layer of linen in front of it. She stuffed a hand in through the fold of her robe, navigating towards her jeans, and eventually came out with the pouch she had taken from the first room she'd entered. We used the crime we've already committed. She grinned, shaking the pouch to make the coins jangle invitingly. You. The crime you committed. All right, then. I'll buy some food with the coins I stole, and you can go hungry. Wait, no, I haven't had dinner yet. Please buy me something to eat. They left the orchard and house behind, heading out into the streets of an unfamiliar town filled with people they couldn't understand. And that's it for tonight's chapter reading. I hope the one person currently watching the stream enjoyed that. Though this video will be available on playback, so anyone can watch it afterwards. Yeah, that's pretty much all of it. Til Time, the Sultan Siege will be coming out next Wednesday, 1st of September. You can find it on Amazon Kindle, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Smashwords, and any other smaller retailers that Smashwords handle. And if you're interested, there are some Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter links below in the description. So follow them if you want to keep up to date with anything relating to my writing. So yeah, thank you. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. End it.